Hello and welcome to another episode of Whither the Looniversity, the podcast of the Peerless Review. I'm excited about my guest today. He has spent, almost 4 decades, not quite, almost 4 decades in the university, mostly as a professor of English. He is currently at Georgia State University, Perimeter College. He's a former dean, a department chair. He is my colleague as a higher education fellow at Campus Reform Online, published in many different publications like the Chronicle of Higher Education, the Brownstone Institute, American Thinker, many, many more. And he is author of a number of books, recently, 9 Virtues of Exceptional Leaders and Think Better, Write Better. My guest today is Professor Rob Jenkins. Rob, thanks for being with us.
Adam, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about this. I've been looking forward to it.
So I ask this of everybody, but it'll move us into my first question for you. Tell us the story of how you got into sort of English studies at large. Take us back to the beginning.
Okay. Well, I'm like a lot of people who went into English back in the 1980s. I was kind of a bookish kid growing up. I was the guy that sat in the back of the classroom all through high school and read Lord of the Rings and, stuff like that. Wanted to be a writer. And I thought about other things. I thought about maybe teaching history and coaching basketball at the high school level. When I was in college for a while, I was dating a young lady who was, let's just say, fairly high maintenance. And so I thought, well, maybe I should go into law because I'm going to need to make more money. But when we broke up and I met my wife, who is not high maintenance, and she was an educator too, then I felt free to kind of go back to my first love and major in English, and then went from there to graduate school and from teaching. So that's and with a stint in coaching along the way. So, and I did that. While I was teaching. I mean, now when I was coaching, especially when I was head coach. Now, when I was assistant coach, I taught a full load, which at that time at the institution where I was 5 classes.
Wow.
When I became head coach, they let me out of a couple of classes, and then when I became athletic director, they let me out of another one. But I was still teaching too, and doing all that other stuff. So, but it was fun. I enjoyed it, and reached a point where I didn't enjoy the coaching quite as much. And so I went into administration for a while, that graveyard of former coaches. Right. And I did that for a while and decided I wanted to get out of that and just go back to teaching, which is my first love, and have time to, write some books, write more articles, do some traveling and speaking and so forth. So that's kind of my journey.
So I'm curious. We don't have to spend a long time on this, but do you still play basketball?
I get out and shoot around. There's a church right across the street from our neighborhood that has a really nice court, and I go over there and shoot. I haven't actually played in a pickup game in a while. I would probably break something if I did, but if the last thing I want to do is get out there and run up and down with a bunch of young guys. But if I could find guys in their 40s and 50s who played high school ball and know what they're doing, because the worst thing you can do is play with people who don't know how to play. That's how you get injured. but seriously, when I was athletic director, I used to get into pickup games with our baseball players. And, oh my gosh, all they knew how to do was just hack people. But anyway, if I could find guys my age and we could play half court, I'm not up for full court, then I would do it. But I haven't been able to find that. So I just go shoot around occasionally.
Cool.
I can still shoot, by the way. I want to be very clear about that. I can't jump. I can't dunk. A lot of things I can't do anymore, but I can still shoot.
So you're the 3-point man. We just get you open and you can hit them.
Get me open and I can hit them. That's right.
Okay. So I was a freshman at college in 1996, and I think I probably declared an English major maybe in 1998. you've been in and around English department since well before that. And so you have a longer institutional and disciplinary memory than I have. How have you seen the field of English change over the time that you've been sharing space with English professors and people who study this field?
Well, I think in two main ways. One is philosophical and the other is technological. I left graduate school just as deconstructionism was coming into vogue. And, that's like leaving town on the last train, before the meteor hits or something like that. I feel very fortunate that I didn't have to deal with that. But obviously the people who came after me and, as the years went on, my younger colleagues were all steeped in that. And that has evolved over the years into what we currently call wokeness. I see a direct connection there. Because one of the fundamental ideas is that, and I'm sure this is a tremendous oversimplification, and it's something you know a lot more about than I do, but the basic idea is that nothing has any inherent meaning. And that idea sort of bled from English departments over into social sciences, and now it's infecting the hard sciences. But I have seen more and more of that over the years when I was a department chair and I had to evaluate people, and as serving on committees and looking at junior faculty members' syllabi and things like that. I've seen this whole progressivism, wokeness, neo-Marxism, and these are all perfectly nice, good people, but they just have, in my opinion, some very nutty ideas, and in my view, it's harmful to student learning. I don't think, I really don't think we're helping students the way that we could. The analogy that I make sometimes, the universities have basically declared that there's no such thing as truth. And so, to me, that's like the American Dental Association coming out and declaring there's no such thing as cavities. Well, then what's your point, right? What's your purpose? Why are you here? Why should we pay any attention to you at all if this thing you've been warning us about all these years just doesn't even exist? So I'm getting off track. I'm kind of
Well,
edging maybe
let
into
me
some
pick
of
your brain about that then,
yeah.
because you say that they're good people, and I think you're probably right. But why do they all have the same ideas? And my suspicion is, and you can tell me if you think I'm wrong, my suspicion is that at least one generation of the professorate in English departments now thinks that essentially wokeism is what the discipline of English is, right? That's the only way they know how to do it. Like if you took that off the table and you said, all right, we're not going to do any activism anymore. We're not going to do any bit of indoctrination or teach you how to be a good Marxist. If we took all that off the table, I suspect there's at least one generation of English professors who would have no idea what to do if not that. Do you think that that's accurate?
Yes, I think that's accurate. And this is what I see when I'm on these committees and I'm reviewing their syllabi and their assignments and so forth. I'm still trying to help my students learn how to write so that down the road they can write a report for their boss that makes sense and that helps them advance their career. And I'm looking at my junior colleagues' syllabi, and they have all of these activism type assignments, and I don't get it. I mean, I understand, like you say, that's the way that they were taught, and that's what they think we ought to be doing.
Would you
one of
say
my fundamental beliefs, and you probably share this, if I can get through an entire semester, and at the end of the semester, my students have no idea whether I'm conservative or leftist, then I feel like I've succeeded. But and it used to be back in the 80s, maybe even on into the 90s, that my more liberal, I'll use the old-fashioned word, my more liberal colleagues felt the same way. Most of them anyway. But now they absolutely think that the whole purpose of teaching is activism, and the whole purpose of teaching. I was brought up in the tradition that we teach students how to think. We don't tell them what to think. I know that's kind of a cliche, but that's what I was taught, and that's what I've always believed. And that is completely foreign to this younger generation. They think it is absolutely their job to tell these kids what it is they should think.
Well, that's why I dropped probably 10 years ago. I think I was where you are on that question of I felt good if my students couldn't tell. And once I realized, this was probably about 10 years ago, that without exception, every one of my colleagues on the left just did not care at all about even the pretense of neutrality.
Right.
And then it hit me like, if everybody on my side is sort of striving for this appearance of neutrality and nobody on the other side is, we lose. And at that point, I became more of openly committed towards sort of conservative ideas.
Well, I mean, that's a fair point, and I have taken some tentative forays in that direction myself just recently. Talking about argumentation in class the other day, I shared a pair of essays from spring of 2020. One was a professor writing for the Atlantic saying there's no way we should reopen campuses in the fall. And then my response to him on the Martin Center blog, that's the Martin Center for Academic Renewal, saying, yes, we absolutely need to open campuses. And, first we talked about this is how educated civil people argue with each other. It's not name calling, it's making points and counterpoints and so forth. That was the main thing I wanted to show them. But at the end I said, so, this argument's from 3 years ago, who was right? And they
what
just
did they say to blankly.
That? And I mean, they didn't have an answer to that. And I said, well, not to pat myself on the back here, but I was right. And I had pre-prepared for this. I had all these, I started pulling up these articles about natural immunity and about, the extremely low fatality rate, like 0.003 for people in their 20s.
Yeah.
Which were things that I had argued back in spring of 2020, because we already knew these things. And it wasn't partisan, really. It wasn't political in the traditional sense, but now, of course, anything that rings of truth is political. And if you're speaking truth nowadays, it sort of marks you as being on the right.
Right.
And I don't know if my students are sophisticated enough to pick up on that, but they just sat there with their eyes as big as saucers.
Well, they don't encounter that. I really, they don't. This is one of the things that confuses me. As you said, the university's been committed, or at least the humanities have been committed towards there's no meaning in anything, or there's no truth. But what shocks me is it's kind of very selective when they take that radically agnostic pose. It's like, say about something like, do masks work? What does this text mean? Those are questions where they might say, well, there's no truth, like it's totally subjective. Who knows? We can't judge. But then on other things, like say race is the core of your identity. Like many of my leftist colleagues will say that is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. That race has undeniable meaning. And so it's almost like whatever they like, whatever ideas strike them as good and valid ideas, those get insulated from the attacks of deconstruction and everything else. And anything that they disagree with, they just pour this acid all over to dissolve the concepts on the table,
Well, that's yeah. Well, I mean, it's all incoherent. It's like the sex and gender are different, unless we need them to mean the same thing, in which case they're the same thing. And so you can't win any argument, because if you're responding to their claim that sex and gender are the same thing, then they say, well, sex and gender are different. Everybody knows that.
Right.
And if you point out that they're different, they say, well, no, but a trans woman is a woman. Well,
Right.
then you're saying that they're the same. So
Right.
you got to pick a lane here, but no, they don't have to pick a lane because they own the culture and they can say whatever they want.
That you just put your finger on the problem. Is I think that they've sort of figured out that they don't have to pick a lane, right? That, and this is of course baked into the cake, is this critique of reason. They say, well, reason is just a tool of the patriarchy. How dare you hold me to these principles of logic and rationality? These are just oppressive strategies for control. Of course, you can't. It's like you said, you just can't argue with that. So these trends have been, I think, bubbling at least since I would say 2010. And I think they kind of accelerated a little bit in around 2012, and then 2016 it really hit again. But do you agree like that the breaking point seems to have been 2020, that we seem to have crossed a Rubicon that year, that can't that whatever channels there were for productive dialogue from these different perspectives prior to that just obliterated them, that now it's just sort of all against all.
Yeah, I think 2020 was the tipping point for a lot of things. And I think one of the things that happened there is that the left figured out that they could bully us. They could bully everyone, pretty much everyone, into doing whatever they wanted just by shouting science at them. And so, we see all these quote unquote scientific arguments for transgenderism and for other things, which, I mean, they're laughable on their face because they're just so absurd. I can do a simple DNA swab, and there's your science, But if I think they learn if they just yell science, and accuse you of wanting to kill people. That was another tactic that they used. I think there was not exactly equilibrium because they've had the upper hand for a while, but I think they were afraid to push too far because they thought we might push back. And what they learned in 2020 is hardly anybody's going to push back.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the science angle that you were talking about illustrates again that they don't have to choose a lane, because science and the scientific method, scientific ideas have been a target of sort of the left in the humanities for some time. This idea that, well, the science is, enshrines this sort of Western ways of knowing, these this skepticism, rationality, logical premises, and this has been, something that they have subjected to a lot of criticism for a long time, until they turned on a dime and decided the science settled. Here's what the science is. We should all listen to it.
Right.
It really is disturbing. So you've written quite a bit about leadership, and you've served in leadership roles in academia. You've served in leadership roles in college athletics. And we've been talking about this mindset. You could call it wokeism, you could call it postmodernism, you could call it ideological progressivism. But I think it's safe to say that it is a mindset, a way of looking at the world. And I'm curious to hear what you have to say about how that mindset lends itself to the demands of leadership. Because obviously there's a higher degree of younger people who share this mindset, and increasingly they will move into leadership positions. Will they be able to meet the demands of those positions if they start from these premises that we've been discussing?
I mean, the short answer is no, and I'm very concerned about that. And not just in academia, because I mean, I'm going to be out of here in a few years, but in government, in medicine, in law enforcement, in the K-12 schools, I mean, the things that these people believe are toxic, and I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean it descriptively. They're toxic. These people basically destroy everything they touch. It's like, their fingers are coated with hydrochloric acid or something. They just destroy everything they touch. And I've seen so many of my favorite institutions. My three sons are all Eagle Scouts, and I know the Boy Scouts had their problems, and like some other organizations have had. But boy, once the left got their hands on that, it would be an understatement to say it's not the same anymore. It basically just blew up. It also concerns me a little bit, and I guess this is more of a from a selfish standpoint, as somebody who does a lot of leadership development, going on site and doing training and so forth. That all the air is being sucked out of that room by the DEI folks. It's all about DEI. I mean, almost probably 80% of the leadership development nowadays is about DEI, which to your point is complete garbage. And I've said on Twitter and elsewhere that we are rapidly becoming the stupidest generation that ever lived. And part of the problem is that the most educated people among us are the stupidest, because they know so much that isn't true. All this stuff that they know, and they have these credentials and they have these degrees, but so much of what they know simply isn't true. It's wrong, and it doesn't work. And perfect case in point is that, and I wrote about this for Campus Reform today, that DEI administrator at Stanford who just made a complete ass of herself when they invited that circuit court judge in to speak. And
this was, fill us in on this. I know what you're talking about. This was
okay.
Go ahead.
So that apparently the Federalist Society at Stanford had invited a Trump-appointed circuit court judge, a guy named, I think his name is Kyle Duncan, to come and speak at the law school as a guest of the Federalist Society. And apparently he would, some people in the crowd were being rude and stuff when he was trying to speak. So this DEI administrator, the Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and I'm still not clear if that's just for the law school or for the entire university. I'm not sure about that. But she got up there ostensibly to quiet the protesters down and to restore order and so forth. And then she just proceeded to give this long speech about this judge's decisions. And she didn't mention any specific decisions, how they had harmed people. She never said what harm they had done or whom they had harmed. And she just went on. And her speech was, not only was it full of, hackneyed DEI cliches, but it was embarrassing, frankly. It was full of grammatical errors. And I guess that's a Western construct as well nowadays, but you would expect somebody with an advanced degree to be able to use proper English when they're up there speaking.
Yeah. I saw this woman's salary. It shocked me. She makes more than double what I make as a full professor.
Well, that isn't shocking to me at all. First of all, it's in California.
Yeah.
Where that much money probably won't get you an apartment downtown, but but yeah, she kept saying how uncomfortable it made her. And then she kept saying, she kept turning to the judge who's standing there looking at her almost pityingly, like, lady, you're making an idiot of yourself. And she kept saying, I support your right to speak. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. And then she would launch into another 3-minute diatribe.
Is the juice worth the squeeze?
Is the juice what the heck does that even mean? I mean, it's just idiotic.
It's really like, I've thought a lot about what she meant by that, and
yeah.
There's a lot of different interpretations, but I think just to take the metaphor literally, what it means, translator applied situation, is what you will get out of saying this worth what you're going to do by saying. And
I guess that's what, yeah.
it starts like that premise is so crazy. Like, why, if he didn't think it was worth saying, why would he say it? Right? Like, it's so strange to have a third party decide whether what you're saying is or is not worthwhile. It's crazy.
Absolutely. And, to your point, she's not, her job is not to be the arbiter of that. Let him speak, let the students hear it, let them make up their own minds. But of course they can't do that, because anybody who speaks truth is, yes, going to be reviled by a certain percentage of people, but they're also going to reach people. This is the way you reach people, is by speaking truth. And so the left cannot allow us to speak truth. They have to shout us down. They have to, ban us from Twitter and deplatform us at universities, because if we speak the truth, some people are going to hear it and go, you know what? That's true. And they can't allow that. But the point I was really getting to was that it wasn't random. It wasn't an isolated incident, and it wasn't just this one DEI administrator who happens to be an idiot. That's what they're taught.
Oh, yeah.
In their leadership schools, in these development courses they take. That's exactly what they're taught. So to the point that you began with, are these people going to be well equipped to lead? Well, there's exhibit A. They are not well equipped to lead. They are whatever the opposite of being well equipped to lead is, they're that. And my co-author, Carl Hayden, who's a philosopher by training, what we tried to do in the 9 virtues was to take basically the classical and cardinal virtues from Greek and Roman society, from the Judeo-Christian tradition, and translate them into the modern world. How people, by incorporating those virtues into their lives, can be better people and better leaders. And that's still what we're committed to doing. Interestingly, Carl, up until recently, would have described himself as a liberal, by which he means, we're in Georgia here, so I'll just say an old-fashioned Jimmy Carter kind of liberal.
Right.
I don't know what religion Carl is. I'm pretty sure he's a Christian, but I don't know what denomination. But I'll just say an Episcopalian liberal, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's been kind of red-pilled recently. I don't think he would mind me saying that. He's probably still more center, maybe slightly left of center, certainly more than I am. But he and I both share this idea that if you incorporate these traditional virtues, humility, courage, honesty, perseverance, those kinds of things that have never in the history of the world been controversial. That if you do that, you'll be a better person. And the way you become a better leader is, first of all, by becoming a better person. But now all of a sudden we find that we're being crowded out of the space by the DEI folks. And we're not going there. We're not going to go in there and say stuff that we don't believe is true just to get contracts or just so people will invite us back. And at the same time, in the sessions that we do, we're getting some pushback on some of these things. Like, I don't know that anybody has said it exactly the way you said it, but basically that, these are Western constructs, and they're essentially racist. And when somebody tells me that logic is racist, I know for a fact that the next thing out of their mouth is not going to be logical. and when somebody tells me that honesty is racist, then I know for a fact that they're a liar. So right. they're revealing who they are. But unfortunately, they have. Adam, I'll tell you the thing that shocks me more than anything else. Maybe shock is a strong word, but I can't wrap my head around the outsized influence that people like Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi have on the culture right now.
Yeah,
these are not especially talented people, And again, I don't say that to insult them. I'm just speaking objectively. They're not exceptionally bright or exceptionally talented. I mean, obviously they're bright, they're
I
smart,
think
but they're not.
they're grifters. They're grifters. They're
They
good at grifting.
they absolutely are grifters. But I
You remember Jimmy Swaggart?
yes,
Jimmy Swaggart was good at what he did.
he was good at
Uh,
what he did. Yes.
so's Kendi and so's D'Angelo. Um, I don't
I
know.
had the thought back in 2000, I was watching the Bush Gore debates, and I thought to myself, we're a country of, at the time, over 300 million people. And these two guys are the best we can do. Out of 300 million people, these two guys are the best we can do. I'm not an especially gifted public speaker or anything like that. I could do a better job in a debate than either one of those guys.
Yeah.
How did they get there? And it's a rhetorical question. Oh, their families have money, and they made the right friends, and I know what the answer to that question is, but how did we get here when our only choice is the lesser of two evils?
And if you remember, I think about that time sometimes, like when I look back on Bush v. Gore, one of the things that really strikes me is that I don't know if obviously Saturday Night Live is terrible. It was terrible even in 2000, but it was less terrible then. But like at that time when they would do sketches about those Bush versus Gore debates, the big joke, the running gag was that they were both saying exactly the same thing. And I think that it was only 23 years ago that the gag was that the two candidates were both saying the same thing, that they were indistinguishable from one another. We've come along. We to use another sort of matrix metaphor, I guess. We've gone a long way down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, I want you to know that that Saturday Night Live was awesome in like 1978.
It was really awesome in like 1993. It was only really like, and this is the same story what happened to university. Like once they learned piety, right? Once the show became concerned with what was due piety and what was not due
Right.
piety, right? It stopped being funny because
Right.
part of humor, especially that show, was irreverence. And
Right.
being irreverent towards things that we already hate and despise just isn't funny. Irreverence only works if you're hitting up,
Right.
and they won't do it anymore.
Well, file that under the heading of what I said earlier. They destroy everything they touch.
Right.
Hollywood, comedy. They're trying to destroy sports right now, which I take that very personally.
Yeah.
But they've succeeded to some degree. I don't sit down and watch basketball games the way I used to, and I've done that all my life. I've loved it, but I just the wokeness that permeates the culture and the commercials that come on and everything. It's just like it makes me tired.
Do you think that this is kind of a side question, but do you think that the people who create this messaging, is it in earnest? In other words, do they really think that they're doing good and speaking truth? Or is this kind of messaging a means to foment dissent, right? A means to create sort of cultural instability and a culture of distrust. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think some of the people who are behind it might be trying to foment that culture of distrust, but I think the people who are doing it, and I read something recently that really made a lot of sense to me, and that is that in a lot of these woke companies, it's the millennial middle managers that are pushing all this crap. I think they're true believers. I think we can look at it and say, well, that's stupid. You're just going to lose half your audience. How in the world is that a good strategy for selling products? But I honestly think they don't care. I think virtue signaling is more important to them than making money. Now, that seems to me to be an unsustainable business model. And I think some companies are discovering that. We say get woke, go broke, and Sadly, that isn't always true, but you do see lots of examples of it. But it's almost like they don't care. I mean, Hollywood makes these movies that nobody goes to see because they're boring and they're preachy and people just aren't interested. But then they give them awards and go on about how wonderful they are. And I'm thinking, do you live to lose money? I mean, is that what you're doing? Or, but I guess their model is then they throw out the next Marvel movie and it makes, 180 million. And so then they invest that money back into all the woke garbage.
Right.
I mean, that's been the publishing industry's model for 50 years.
Yeah. The record industry too. The record
industry too.
So you mentioned middle management, and I think sometimes that, there's certainly true believers in academia, but I also think that young students, like young graduate students, like 22, 23, 24 years old, who are still sort of forming themselves as a thinker, as a researcher, these kinds of things, I think that there's so much peer pressure that they start to believe that the mark of intelligence is thinking certain things to be true, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like, how good of a thinker are you? It's like, if you believe that trans women are women, well, then you're an intelligent person, because what it means to be intelligent is to think this, that, and the other thing, and just check on down the list. And
Right.
so I wonder sometimes, like, how much of our problem is kind of coercive in the sense that it's just these ideas are modeled as virtuous ideas that are sort of arcane, that only a really intelligent person can see how true this thing is, and that because the normies don't believe it, or because they believe something else, is the mark of their outsideness. And if you want to be on the inside, then you have to at least pretend that you are one of the ones who are enlightened enough to understand why, say, trans women are really women.
Right.
And so in that sense, it's almost like a virus in the true sense. I mean, if you spend too much time around these people, and if you have designs on an academic career, well, your pronouns have to be in your Twitter bio, because you're just not going to get an interview if they're not. How do we deal with that? How do we address that?
Well, it's the story of the emperor's new clothes writ large, right? I mean, that's what that fairy tale is about. That's exactly what's going on. What I try to do, and I have very limited reach within academia. I mean, mostly just my own students, right? I mean, I guess I write stuff and maybe other people read it, and I do not infrequently have other conservative professors reach out to me and say, thanks for saying that. And I appreciate it, but mostly I'm just dealing with my own students. And so what I decided years ago, when all of this first really, when it became evident to me that this is what's going on and this is where we're headed, and it wasn't just the kind of, liberal professors that I grew up with, it had gone way beyond that. My goal is to help my students learn to think for themselves. And I know that sounds like a cliche. And part of the reason it sounds like a cliche to my ears is because 30 years ago, that's what everybody was doing. But now, it really sets you apart. I talk about this in my book, Think Better, Write Better, how we, there's this huge disconnect. We have survey after survey after survey for the last 10, 15 years. One of them, for example, conducted by PayScale, they surveyed like 70,000 managers. So it wasn't small, but there are dozens of other surveys with smaller groups conducted by the Chronicle of Higher Education, the American Association of Universities and Colleges. I mean, dozens of these at this point, and they all show the same thing. They ask the employers, what do college graduates do well and what do they do poorly? And the number one on the list of things they do poorly is always write. They can't write. That's number one. And number two, close on its heels, is they can't think. And that's why I wrote my book, and that's why I gave it the title that I did, right? So we've got universities claiming, not just claiming, but shouting from the rooftops that they're teaching critical thinking. And then these kids get into the workforce, and the end users, the people that are hiring them, are saying, well, no, not so much. They can't do it. And so either the universities are just flat out lying, or the two groups mean something different when they use the term critical thinking. And I obviously, I think that's what it is. When employers, when businesses say critical thinking, what they mean is the ability to use your brain to solve a problem.
Right.
Just to put it as simply as possible. Whereas in academia, we've conflated old-fashioned critical thinking with critique.
Yes.
You know, and they are not the same thing. And this is one of the things that I teach. And, you know, to your point about that you made a few minutes ago, you've become a little bit more of an activist in class. And, you know, I may find myself going that direction too. But what I've always believed is if I can teach my students to think for themselves, they will eventually come around to a more conservative point of view. Maybe not as conservative as I am, but at least right of center, because the left makes no sense. We've gotten to the point where nothing they say makes any sense. None of it's logical. How do we know it's not logical? Because they've declared logic to be racist. They say such and such is true, and we say, no, it isn't. And they say, yes, it is. And we say, well, no, and here's why it isn't. It's not logical. And they say, oh, well, logic is racist. Like, oh, okay. I mean, what are you supposed to do with that? What that means is that your point of view isn't logical, which is what I was saying to begin with. So I think if we can teach kids to think for themselves, they will eventually sort things out. The problem is, obviously, there aren't very many of us trying to do this. It's I don't know how much danger there is of my bosses seeing this podcast, but it's one of the reasons I'm hanging on. I mean, I love what I do. I can't imagine not doing it, but I also think if I leave, they're going to replace me with some 28-year-old wokester who's going to be teaching them absolute garbage that is not going to help them in their professional lives. It's not going to help them in their personal lives. It's going to make them less happy. It's going to make them miserable. And by the way, we know this is true because the depression and suicide rates on college campuses are just shooting through the roof.
Yeah.
And also, by the way, to my earlier point about the stupidest generation, did you see the article, the study that came out a week or two ago that IQs, the nation's average IQ has gone down for the first time in 100 years?
Yes.
And it's worst in the 18 to 22-year-old age bracket. Colleges and universities today are literally making people stupider. That's not an exaggeration.
Sometimes I think they're making me stupider. Honestly, I do. Sometimes I think, like, you know, you can only be around, like, essentially people with this woke progressive mindset, right? At a certain point, like, they talk and talk and talk, and you're thinking, well, that's crazy, that's crazy, that's crazy. But you look around you and everybody else is going, yeah. And at a certain point, you have to say, is it me? Like, am I crazy?
Exactly. I wrote a piece about this for American Thinker a year or so ago. The title of it is "We're Not the Crazy Ones." You know, I mean, look, the others. I have that same conversation with myself sometimes, Adam. I'm like, am I wrong? Am I the crazy one? And then I think to myself, no, the other side thinks that men can have babies.
Right.
End of discussion. I'm not the crazy one.
Yes. Well, that's something that I reassure myself with too, that certain, and I think like you said, like one of the things that has made me more activist is sometimes I think, like, we're at the point now where in 4 years of college education, I could be the only professor that
Yes.
students here make a joke about masking. I could be the only professor who says that maybe unfettered illegal immigration isn't a totally good thing for the United States, right? I could be run it down the line. Like I could be like they might only hear one person say it the entire time. Um,
Yeah. That's
and
true.
I say to them sometimes, like if you get sort of angry with what I say, bear in mind, like don't worry because you're not going to hear anybody else say it. Um, and if you make it through 4 years of college without ever getting offended, you got ripped off. Um,
Absolutely. Are you, do you at least issue a trigger warning before you say these things, Adam?
of course, of course.
Of
I
course.
actually on my syllabus, I have a section that says I do not give trigger warnings. So
Okay.
if you are sensitive to other perspectives that you disagree with, I recommend you take another class. If you decide to carry forward, consider this your warning. You've been warned.
I have a section on my syllabus that basically says, get over it.
Yes, that's
You
good.
know, um, what I actually say is that being offended, first of all, is a choice. Offense is, even if something is objectively offensive, and hardly anything is objectively offensive, offense is something that is taken, not given. So you can simply choose, and I'm not just talking about my class, I'm talking about life.
Yeah.
You want to be successful in life, you can simply choose not to be offended. And secondly, the the proper response to being, to something that is objectively offensive is not to get your panties in a wad. I don't literally use that language in the syllabus. The proper response is to, formulate a cogent rebuttal. And that's what this class is about. That's what we're trying to learn how to do. So if you think you have a better idea and you can make a good argument for it, then I'm gonna help you learn how to do that.
This traces back though to the mindset we were talking about. I really say you say being offended is a choice. I agree with you, but I think many of these people understand that it's a choice, and being offended is the desirable choice in this
I guess
sense,
so.
right? To be offended
Yeah.
is to be victimized. And of course, to be a victim or to have been a victim is a kind of currency, right?
Yeah.
It's a rhetorical currency, if nothing else. And so, to not be offended in some sense is to leave money on the table, right? Um,
I hadn't thought about that, but that's a good point.
yeah, I
No wonder they're so miserable. Yeah,
there's a lot of
seriously, no wonder they're all depressed
there's
and
a lot of
contemplating
money to
suicide.
take off the table.
Yeah.
Uh, so we should probably wrap it up, but let me ask you this:
Okay.
if there was one thing, if Professor Jenkins was the Grand Chancellor of the American University for a day, that you think we could do to policy wise or really in any other sense to get us back on the right track, not to get us to where we need to be, but to move us in the right direction, what would that thing be?
Well, I think we need to follow Governor DeSantis's example and just utterly lay waste to the DEI departments, CRT, all that sort of thing. Um, I wrote about that recently for Campus Reform, and I'm somebody that has written extensively over the years about free speech and academic freedom, and I've been a big believer and supporter of those things. But I think they have been horribly abused by many of our colleagues, and it's to the point where the cancer has grown to the point where all you can do is cut it out.
Yeah.
And if that means, I mean, here's the way I see it: they brought this on themselves. They could have moderated their position years ago. They could have continued teaching these things as theories instead of fact, and no one would ever have said a word. It's, to me, it's a lot like the abortion question. Um, if they hadn't tried to push abortion up to the day of birth and beyond, I don't think that Roe v. Wade would ever have been overturned. I don't think there would have been any groundswell to, I think as long as in Bill Clinton's famous words, it was, safe,
Legal and rare.
Yes,
Safe,
exactly.
legal, and rare.
Safe, legal, and I think even the people that were pro-life, I think that for most people that was an acceptable compromise, because we realized how wide the gulf was there, and what a volatile issue it was. But when they just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, same thing with the trans issue. I don't care if some dude dresses up like a woman, I it doesn't affect me at all. But when they came after the kids, that's when we put our foot down and said no more.
That,
It's
or when they make claims on my speech, and
yeah,
say I
yes,
need to
yes,
change this or that about how I
exactly.
think or speak.
Right.
Um,
And it's the same with DEI. They get upset. Well, you're telling us what we can say and what we can't. Well, welcome to my world, buddy. I've been living in that world for 40 years. And so, now the shoe's on the other foot, but I have no sympathy for you whatsoever, because it's destroying the university, and we just have to cut it out. And I don't know if that one thing by itself will be enough, as you said, but if I had to pick one thing, that would be it.
well, Governor DeSantis is doing really good things, and Governor Abbott in Texas has started to come around on a little bit of this. He forbid state agencies from using DEI in their hiring practices, which I think was part of the reason that my university was so quick to take down our anti-racism statement on our page. I think that they decided maybe now is not the time to push the envelope, although I can't say for sure what drove that.
Well,
But
and
I
I
agree.
I have a son who's in graduate school. I'm not going to say where or in what field, because I don't want to harm his career. Um, but he's probably going to be going on the market in the fall, and he's excited that he now has the entire state of Texas. He he's checking them off. I got Florida, I got Texas. I can apply at those places. I don't have to worry about writing a diversity statement, and trying to thread the needle between saying things that are going to be acceptable to the committee, but not saying things that I don't actually believe. Because he said, I'm not going to do that,
Yeah.
for which I'm very proud of him. But he's a smart guy, and I think he'll be a brilliant professor. Somebody be lucky to get him. But a lot of these schools aren't going to have a shot, because he's just not going to apply there.
Yeah.
But now he's got Texas, and it's what do you guys have, about 80,000-90,000 universities down there, something like that.
There's a lot of them, and with that people pouring into the state from all over, same thing that's happened in Florida. I imagine there will be a lot of faculty lines opening. Now, who those lines will go to, they have more cunning ways than the DEI statement to
Yes, they do.
force their ends.
But it's a start.
Grant, yeah. Well, Godspeed to your son, and
Thank you.
thank you so much. I've enjoyed the conversation. Dr. Rob Jenkins, you can check out his most recent book is Think Better, Write Better, right?
That's absolutely correct. Yes.
All right, great. My colleague at Campus Reform Online. Thanks again, Rob.
Thank you so much, Adam. I enjoyed it very much.
Sure.